Hey everyone, tonight we're diving deep into the shadows of history, into places most of us never think about when we romanticize the past. We're talking about the grit, the glory, the blood, and the brilliance of lives lived thousands of years ago. Before you settle in, if you find value in these stories, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you genuinely want more of this kind of content. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing this community spread across time zones. Now, get comfortable. Maybe dim the lights, grab a drink, and let's step backward through time together. Because tonight, we're not just learning history, we're living it. Welcome to ancient Rome. The year is 150 CE, and you've just woken up in a cramped insula, a multi-story apartment building in the heart of the city. The smell hits you first. It's a potent mixture of human waste, rotting food, smoke from oil lamps, and the sweat of thousands of bodies packed into a city that was never designed to hold this many people. You're not a senator or a wealthy merchant. You're a plebe, an ordinary Roman, and your life is about survival, not luxury. The room you share with your family is barely large enough to lie down in. There's no running water up here on the fourth floor, no windows with glass, just wooden shutters that let in the cold, the noise, and the ever-present stench of the streets below. Your bed is a straw mattress, thin and lumpy, crawling with bugs that you've long since stopped trying to kill. They're just part of life now, like the ache in your back and the constant hunger in your belly. You sit up, joints cracking, and immediately step onto the cold stone floor. It's winter, and there's no heating except for a small brazier that you can't afford to keep burning all night. Your breath mists in the air. Outside, the city is already awake. Vendors are shouting. Cartwheels are clattering over cobblestones, and somewhere in the distance, a fight has broken out. Rome never sleeps, and neither do you, really. You barely got 4 hours of rest because your neighbor was beating his slave again, and the walls here are thinner than parchment. You pull on your tunic, the same one you've worn for weeks. It's made of rough wool, itchy and stiff with dried sweat. If you're lucky, you might wash it once a month in the public fountain, scrubbing it with your hands in a bit of ash. There's no soap, no detergent, just water and hope. Your sandals are falling apart, the leather cracked and held together with twine you scavenged from the docks. But they'll have to do, because new ones cost money you don't have. Now comes the morning ritual, if you can call it that. You need to relieve yourself, but there's no private toilet in your apartment. Instead, you head down the narrow, dark staircase, trying not to trip over the garbage and filth that's piled up in the corners. Some of your neighbors just throw their waste out the window into the street below, shouting a half-hearted warning as chamber pots full of urine and feces go flying. You've learned to walk close to the buildings to avoid the splash. When you reach the ground floor, you head to the public latrine a few blocks away. It's a communal affair, a long stone bench with holes cut into it, positioned over a channel of running water. There's no privacy, no partitions, just you and a dozen other Romans sitting side by side, conducting your business while chatting about the weather, the latest gladiator fight, or the price of bread. The smell is eye-watering, a thick, sulphurous cloud that clings to your clothes. Toilet paper doesn't exist. Instead, there's a communal sponge on a stick, soaked in vinegar and water that everyone shares. Yes, everyone. You try not to think about it as you use it. Rinse it in the channel and leave it for the next person. Breakfast, if you can afford it, is a piece of stale bread, maybe dipped in wine or oil if you've had a good week. Most Romans don't have kitchens in their apartments because of the fire risk. Insulae are notorious for burning down. Their wooden structures and oil lamps a deadly combination. So you eat cold food or buy something from a street vendor. Today you grab a small loaf and a handful of olives from a stall, paying with a few bronze coins you earned hauling amphorae at the docks yesterday. The bread is hard enough to break a tooth, and the olives are shriveled and salty. But it's food. You wash it down with posca, a drink made of watered-down vinegar that tastes like regret, but at least won't make you sick like the water from the Tiber River. If you drank straight from the river, you'd be dead within a week from dysentery or worse. Rome has aqueducts, yes, and they're marvels of engineering, but the clean water mostly goes to the wealthy, to their private baths and fountains. You get the runoff, and you're grateful for it. Work begins early. If you're a day laborer, you head to the forum or the docks, standing with dozens of other men, hoping to be chosen for a job. Maybe you'll carry grain sacks, or help build a new temple, or clean out a rich man's latrine. The pay is pitiful, barely enough to cover rent and food, and the work is back-breaking. You lift, you haul, you sweat under the Mediterranean sun until your muscles scream and your hands bleed. There are no breaks, no unions, no workers' rights. If you complain, you're replaced. If you're injured, you're left to fend for yourself. There's no healthcare, no disability pay, no safety net. You work until you can't, and then you hope you've saved enough to not starve. But saving is nearly impossible when rent alone takes most of your earnings, and your landlord, a wealthy patrician who's never set foot in this building, raises the price whenever he feels like it. If you're a woman, your day's even harder. You're expected to manage the household, which means fetching water from the public fountain, a task that requires multiple trips with heavy clay jars balanced on your head or hip. You'll shop for food in the markets, haggling with vendors who try to cheat you at every turn. You'll cook, if you have access to a communal oven, or more likely, you'll buy prepared food because it's safer and cheaper than trying to cook in your tinderbox of an apartment. You'll mend clothes, care for children, and if your husband is sick or dead, you'll work too. Maybe as a seamstress, a midwife, or a prostitute, because those are the options available. Roman society doesn't value women's labor unless it's domestic or sexual. And even then, you're seen as property, not a person. If you're unmarried, you're under your father's control. If you're married, you're under your husband's. You have no legal rights, no voice in politics, no claim to your own children if your husband decides to divorce you. And divorce is easy for men, a simple declaration, and you're out, often with nothing. The streets of Rome are a constant assault on the senses. They're narrow, winding, and filthy. Garbage rots in piles, picked over by stray dogs and rats the size of cats. Open sewers run alongside the roads, carrying waste from the public baths and latrines. The smell is indescribable, a thick, cloying stench that you can taste. In the summer, it's worse, the heat amplifying the rot, breeding flies and disease. Plague is a regular visitor to Rome, sweeping through the crowded insulae and killing thousands. When it comes, you can only pray to the gods and hope you're spared. There's no understanding of germs or hygiene, no antibiotics, no hospitals. If you get sick, you visit a temple, make an offering, and hope for divine intervention. Or you see a doctor, if you can afford one, who might prescribe bloodletting, or a poultice made from animal dung, or some other treatment that's just as likely to kill you as cure you. But Rome isn't all misery. There are moments of beauty, of distraction, of something that almost feels like joy. There are the public baths, for instance, grand complexes where, for a small fee, you can soak in hot water, scrape the dirt off your skin with a strigil, and feel almost human again. The baths are social hubs, places to gossip, make deals, and relax. They're one of the few places where class distinctions blur, where a slave might bathe next to a senator. They're not in the same pool. The baths are also places of vice, where prostitutes ply their trade and thieves wait for distracted bathers to leave their belongings unguarded. You've learned to keep your few valuables close, or better yet, not to bring them at all. Then there's the entertainment. Rome is famous for its spectacles, and as a citizen you're entitled to free admission to the games. The Colosseum, a massive amphitheatre that dominates the skyline, is where you go to forget your troubles. Gladiators fight to the death, criminals are torn apart by wild animals, and elaborate naval battles are staged in the flooded arena. It's brutal, bloody, and utterly mesmerizing. You cheer as a gladiator decapitates his opponent, the crowd roaring in approval. You gasp as a condemned prisoner is mauled by a lion, his screams drowned out by the mob's excitement. It's a release, a way to channel the frustration and anger of your daily life into something external. The games are also political tools, paid for by emperors and senators who want to keep the masses happy and distracted. Give them bread and circuses, the saying goes, and they won't revolt. And it works. You're too tired, too entertained, too beaten down to rise up. So you cheer, and you eat your subsidized grain, and you go back to your insula, and you survive another day. Religion is everywhere in Rome, woven into the fabric of daily life. There are temples on every corner, dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and 100 other gods and goddesses. You make offerings when you can, a bit of incense, a piece of fruit, a prayer for good fortune. Religion isn't about personal salvation or moral behavior. It's transactional. You give to the gods, and in return, you hope they give you what you need. A good harvest, a safe journey, a successful business deal. The gods are fickle and petty, prone to jealousy and rage, much like the humans who worship them. You don't love the gods, you fear them, and you try to stay on their good side. But Rome is also a melting pot of beliefs. There are followers of Isis from Egypt, worshippers of Mithras from Persia, and a growing number of Christians, though they're still a persecuted minority. You've heard rumors about them, that they refuse to worship the emperor, that they meet in secret, that they drink blood and eat flesh in their rituals. Most Romans think they're strange and dangerous, a threat to the traditional order. You don't pay them much mind, you have enough to worry about without getting involved in religious controversies. As the day wears on, you work until your body screams for rest. When the sun begins to set, you make your way back to your insula, stopping to buy a bowl of stew from a street vendor. It's thin and greasy, with chunks of mystery meat that you suspect might be rat or dog, but it's hot and filling, and that's all that matters. You eat standing up, leaning against a wall, watching the city transform as night falls. The streets become even more dangerous after dark. Gangs roam freely, mugging anyone foolish enough to be out alone. Fires break out regularly, and without a proper fire brigade, they spread quickly, consuming entire blocks. You've seen it happen. The orange glow lighting up the night sky, the screams of people trapped inside burning buildings. You've learned to sleep lightly, ready to run if the flames come too close. When you finally collapse onto your straw mattress, your body aching and your mind numb, you don't dream of a better life. You don't imagine a future where things are different. You simply close your eyes and hope to wake up in the morning, to do it all over again. Because that's what life is in ancient Rome, for people like you. It's not the marble columns and triumphant arches of the history books. It's dirt and sweat and survival. It's the smell of open sewers and the taste of stale bread. It's the constant grinding struggle to stay alive in a city that chews people up and spits them out without a second thought. And yet, somehow, you endure, you adapt, you survive, because that's what humans do, even in the harshest of times. You find a way to keep going, one day at a time. The social structure of Rome is as rigid as it is complex. At the top of the patricians, the old aristocratic families who trace their lineage back to the founding of the Republic. They own vast estates, control the Senate, and live lives of unimaginable luxury. Below them are the equestrians, the wealthy business class, men who have made their fortunes in trade, tax collection, or military contracts. They're not quite as prestigious as the patricians, but they're far wealthier than most senators. Then there are the plebeians, the common citizens, which includes everyone from moderately successful shopkeepers to day laborers like you. And below everyone else are the slaves, millions of them, captured in Rome's endless wars of conquest. They have no rights, no freedom, and can be bought, sold, beaten, or killed at their master's whim. Slavery is the engine that drives the Roman economy. Slaves work the mines, the farms, the workshops. They serve in wealthy households, cooking, cleaning, and caring for children. Some are highly educated, working as tutors, doctors, or accountants. Others are forced into prostitution or gladiatorial combat. The lucky ones might eventually buy their freedom or be manumitted by a grateful master, becoming freedmen, a class that exists in a strange liminal space, no longer slaves but never fully accepted as citizens. You've worked alongside slaves many times, and sometimes it's hard to see the difference between their lives and yours. They're property, yes, but you're barely free yourself. You're free to starve, free to be evicted, free to die of disease in the gutter. It's a freedom that doesn't mean much. The Roman calendar is filled with festivals and holidays. Over 100 days a year when work stops and the city celebrates. There's Saturnalia in December, a week-long festival of feasting, gift-giving, and role reversal, where slaves are served by their masters and social norms are temporarily upended. There's Lupercalia in February, a fertility festival involving half-naked priests running through the streets whipping women with strips of goat hide, which is supposed to ensure fertility. There are triumphs, elaborate processions celebrating military victories, where generals parade through the streets with their captured treasures and prisoners, who will later be executed or sold into slavery. The festivals are a release, a break from the monotony and hardship of daily life. And you participate enthusiastically, drinking more than you should, eating more than you should, eating more than you can afford, and losing yourself in the collective revelry. Education in Rome is available, but only if you can pay for it. Wealthy families hire private tutors to teach their children Latin, Greek, rhetoric, and philosophy. Boys from elite families are groomed for public life, learning the skills of oratory and debate that will serve them in the Senate or the courts. Girls receive less formal education, focused on household management and the arts considered appropriate for women, music, poetry, weaving. For the vast majority of Romans, education is informal. Learning a trade from a parent or being apprenticed to a craftsman, you can read and write a little, enough to keep basic accounts and read public notices, but you've never had the luxury of studying philosophy or literature. That's for people with time and money, and you have neither. Healthcare in Rome is rudimentary and largely ineffective. Wealthy Romans can afford private physicians, many of them Greek slaves or freedmen, who've been trained in the medical traditions of Hippocrates and Galen. They prescribe herbal remedies, perform surgeries, and attempt to balance the four humors they believe control health, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. For ordinary Romans, healthcare means visiting a temple and praying to Asclepius, the god of medicine, or consulting a local healer who might prescribe amulets, prayers, or folk remedies that are more superstition than science. Life expectancy is low, around 25 to 30 years on average, though this is skewed by high infant mortality. If you survive childhood, you might live into your 50s or even 60s, but chronic pain, dental problems, and minor infections that would be easily treated today can be debilitating or fatal. The Roman military is the most formidable fighting force the world has ever seen, a disciplined, professional army that has conquered most of the known world. For a young man with no prospects, joining the legions is one of the few paths to advancement. The pay is steady, you receive training, equipment, and food, and after 25 years of service, you're granted a pension and a plot of land. But military life is brutal. You'll march 20 miles a day carrying 60 pounds of equipment. You'll fight in hostile terrain against enemies who don't fight by Roman rules. You'll endure harsh discipline, floggings for minor infractions, and decimation, the execution of every 10th man, for cowardice or mutiny. And you'll spend years, even decades, stationed on the frontiers of the empire, in cold, wet Britain, or the scorching deserts of Syria, far from home, surrounded by people who hate you and want you dead. Roman engineering is a source of pride. The aqueducts that bring water to the city are marvels, some stretching for 50 miles or more, using gravity and precise calculations to maintain a steady flow. The roads are straight, paved, and built to last, connecting Rome to every corner of the empire and facilitating trade, communication, and military movement. The Colosseum, the Pantheon, the Forum. These are monuments to Roman ambition and skill, built to last for millennia. And they have. Even in ruin, they inspire awe. But you don't often think about the engineering genius behind these structures. You think about the thousands of slaves and workers who died building them, the crushed hands and broken backs, the lives spent so that emperors could have their monuments. Now, let's shift our gaze from the streets of Rome to the palaces of Egypt, to a woman whose name has echoed through history for more than 2 millennia, Cleopatra VII Philopator, the last active pharaoh of Ptolemaic Egypt, was born in 69 BCE into a world of intrigue, power, and violence. She was not Egyptian by blood, but Macedonian Greek, a descendant of Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander the Great's generals who had claimed Egypt after Alexander's death. The Ptolemaic dynasty had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries by the time Cleopatra was born, and it had maintained its power through a combination of shrewd politics, strategic marriages, and ruthless elimination of rivals. Cleopatra grew up in the royal palace in Alexandria, a city that was a jewel of the ancient world, home to the Great Library of Alexandria and the Pharos Lighthouse. one of the seven wonders, but the palace was also a snake pit, where siblings murdered each other for the throne, where poison and betrayal were common currencies. Cleopatra was the third daughter of Ptolemy XVI Auletes, a weak and unpopular king who spent much of his reign trying to maintain his grip on power with the help of Rome. From a young age, Cleopatra was educated in philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and languages. Unlike many of her predecessors, she made an effort to learn Egyptian, the language of the people she would one day rule, a shrewd political move that endeared her to her subjects. She was intelligent, ambitious, and acutely aware of the precarious position her family held. Egypt was wealthy, its grain fed Rome, but it was also vulnerable, surrounded by Roman ambitions and internal strife. When her father died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra, at 18, was meant to rule alongside her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, who was only 10. The Ptolemaic tradition demanded that she marry him, a common practice in the dynasty to keep power within the family, and the marriage was symbolic, a political formality. From the start, Cleopatra had no intention of being a mere figurehead. She wanted real power, and she quickly moved to sideline her brother and his advisors, issuing decrees in her name alone and presenting herself as the sole ruler of Egypt. But her brother's advisors, led by the eunuch Pothinus, the general Achilles, and the tutor Theodotus, were not willing to let a young woman dominate. They pushed back, rallying support among the military and the court, and within a few years Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria. She retreated to Syria, where she began raising an army, determined to reclaim her throne. It was around this time that fate, in the form of a Roman general, intervened. Julius Caesar, one of the most powerful men in the Roman Republic, arrived in Egypt in 48 BCE, pursuing his rival Pompey the Great, who had fled to Egypt after losing the Battle of Pharsalus. Ptolemy XIII's advisors, hoping to curry favor with Caesar, murdered Pompey and presented his severed head to the Roman general. But Caesar was not pleased. He saw the act as dishonorable, and, more importantly, he saw an opportunity to exert Roman influence over Egypt. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, knew she needed Caesar's support to reclaim her throne, but she also knew that if she tried to enter Alexandria openly, her brother's forces would kill her. So she devised a plan that has become legendary. She had herself smuggled into the palace, rolled up in a carpet, or according to some accounts, a linen sack, and delivered directly to Caesar's quarters. When the carpet was unrolled, out stepped Cleopatra, young, intelligent, and audacious. Caesar was impressed, not just by her boldness, but by her wit and charm. Ancient sources describe Cleopatra not as a stunning beauty, but as a woman of incredible charisma and intelligence. Plutarch wrote that her beauty was not incomparable, but her conversation was captivating and her presence irresistible. She spoke 9 languages, was well versed in politics and philosophy, and knew how to use her intellect as a weapon. Caesar and Cleopatra became lovers, a relationship that was both personal and political. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra defeated her brother's forces in the Alexandrian War. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile while fleeing, and Cleopatra was restored to the throne. She married her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, another symbolic gesture, but it was clear who held the power. In 47 BCE, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, whom she named Ptolemy Caesar, but who was known as Caesarion, Little Caesar. She claimed the child was Caesar's, a claim that Caesar never publicly acknowledged but never denied. The birth of Caesarion was significant because it tied Cleopatra's lineage to the most powerful man in Rome, giving her son a potential claim to both Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra traveled to Rome with Caesarion, living in one of Caesar's villas, a bold and scandalous move. Roman society was not accustomed to foreign queens, especially ones who flaunted their relationship with a Roman general. Cleopatra's presence in Rome was controversial, and she was viewed with suspicion and hostility by many Romans who saw her as a corrupting influence, an Eastern temptress leading their great general astray. But Cleopatra didn't care about Roman gossip. She was focused on securing her position and that of her son. She commissioned a golden statue of herself as the goddess Isis to be placed in the temple of Venus Genitrix, a clear statement of her divine status and her connection to Caesar. But in 44 BCE, everything changed. Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, stabbed to death by a group of senators who feared he was becoming too powerful, too king-like. Cleopatra was in Rome at the time, and Caesar's death left her vulnerable. With her protector gone, she had no reason to stay in a city that despised her. She returned to Egypt, but not before ensuring the death of her co-ruler, Ptolemy XIV, likely by poison, so that her son Caesarion could be elevated to co-pharaoh. Cleopatra was now the undisputed ruler of Egypt, but she knew that Egypt's survival depended on Rome, and Rome was descending into civil war. The Roman Republic was tearing itself apart. On one side were the assassins led by Brutus and Cassius, who claimed to be defending the Republic. On the other were Caesar's allies, Mark Antony, a charismatic general, and Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir and grandnephew. Cleopatra waited, watching to see who would emerge victorious. When Antony and Octavian defeated Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, the Roman world was divided between them, with Antony taking control of the eastern provinces. Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus in 41 BCE, ostensibly to answer questions about her loyalty during the civil war. But Cleopatra turned the summons into a spectacle. She arrived on a magnificent barge, dressed as the goddess Isis, surrounded by attendants dressed as nymphs and cupids, with silver oars and purple sails. The meeting was designed to overwhelm, to seduce, and it worked. Antony, a man who loved luxury and spectacle, was captivated. Cleopatra and Antony became lovers, and their relationship was one of the most famous in history. It was a partnership built on mutual benefit. Cleopatra needed Antony's military power to protect Egypt and expand her influence. Antony needed Cleopatra's wealth to fund his campaigns and his ambitions. Together, they dreamed of creating a new empire in the East, one that would rival Rome itself. Cleopatra bore Antony 3 children, twins named Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and a son named Ptolemy Philadelphus. Antony, in turn, granted Cleopatra vast territories, including parts of Lebanon, Syria, and Crete, restoring much of the old Ptolemaic Empire. But their relationships scandalized Rome. Antony was already married to Octavian's sister Octavia, and his affair with Cleopatra was seen as a betrayal, not just of his wife, but of Rome itself. Octavian, who had been biding his time, used Antony's relationship with Cleopatra as propaganda, painting him as a traitor who had abandoned Rome for an Eastern queen, a man bewitched and controlled by a foreign woman. Octavian claimed that Antony planned to move the capital of the Roman Empire to Alexandria, to give Roman territories to Cleopatra's children, to turn Rome into a subordinate of Egypt. Whether these claims were true or exaggerated didn't matter. They were effective. Roman public opinion turned against Antony, and in 32 BCE, the Roman Senate declared war, not on Antony but on Cleopatra, a clever move that framed the conflict as a defense of Rome against a foreign threat. The final confrontation came in 31 BCE at the Battle of Actium, a naval engagement off the coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra's forces faced Octavian's fleet, commanded by the brilliant general Agrippa. The battle was a disaster. Antony and Cleopatra's ships were outmaneuvered, and in the midst of the fighting, Cleopatra's fleet suddenly turned and fled. Antony, seeing her ships retreat, abandoned his own fleet and followed her. The reasons for their flight are debated. Some sources suggest it was a planned retreat, others that Cleopatra panicked. Regardless, the result was the same. Their fleet was destroyed, their army surrendered, and their cause was lost. Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Alexandria, knowing that Octavian would come for them. In the summer of 30 BCE, Octavian's forces arrived. Antony's remaining soldiers deserted, and the city was surrounded. According to ancient accounts, Cleopatra retreated to her mausoleum, a tomb she had built for herself, and sent word to Antony that she was dead. Antony, overcome with grief, fell on his sword, but the wound was not immediately fatal. When he learned that Cleopatra was actually alive, he begged to be taken to her. He was carried to her mausoleum, and there, in her arms, he died. Cleopatra was now alone, her lover dead, her kingdom fallen, and Octavian at the gates. She attempted to negotiate with Octavian, hoping to secure her children's safety and perhaps retain some measure of power. But Octavian had no interest in sharing Egypt. He wanted it as a Roman province, its wealth to fund his own ambitions, and he wanted Cleopatra as a prisoner to parade through the streets of Rome in his triumph, a humiliating fate for a queen. Cleopatra refused to give him that satisfaction. On August 1230 BCE, she took her own life. The exact method of her suicide is unknown. The most famous account, popularized by Shakespeare, is that she was bitten by an asp, a venomous snake, smuggled into her chamber in a basket of figs. Other sources suggest she used poison. Regardless of the method, the result was the same. Cleopatra died, and with her, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Egypt became a Roman province, and Octavian, soon to be known as Augustus, became the first Roman emperor. Cleopatra's legacy is complex. To the Romans, she was a dangerous seductress, a foreign queen who nearly brought Rome to its knees. To later generations, she has been a symbol of female power, intelligence, and resilience. She was one of the most educated and capable rulers of her time, a woman who spoke multiple languages, managed a complex economy, and navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics. She was not a passive victim, but an active player in the game of empire. She used every tool at her disposal: her intellect, her charm, her wealth, and yes, her sexuality, to protect her kingdom and her children. She was a mother, a queen, a lover, and a strategist. And though she ultimately lost, she did so on her own terms, refusing to be paraded as a captive, choosing death over humiliation. Her story has been told and retold in histories, plays, films, and art, and she remains one of the most iconic figures of the ancient world. A woman who defied the odds and left an indelible mark on history. Alexandria, the city Cleopatra called home, was unlike any other in the ancient world. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, it was a planned city, laid out in a grid pattern with wide streets and magnificent public buildings. By Cleopatra's time, it had become the intellectual and cultural capital of the Mediterranean, rivaling even Rome and Athens. The Library of Alexandria was the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world, containing hundreds of thousands of scrolls on every subject imaginable: philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature. Scholars from across the known world came to study there, supported by royal patronage. The museum, adjacent to the library, was a research institution where scientists and philosophers conducted experiments, made astronomical observations, and debated the nature of the universe. The city was also a commercial hub, its harbors filled with ships from across the Mediterranean and beyond. Goods flowed through Alexandria: grain from Egypt's fertile Nile Valley, spices from India, silk from China, gold from Nubia, wine from Greece. The city's population was diverse: Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, Romans, Syrians, all living side by side, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension. The Jewish community was particularly large and influential, with its own quarter and its own governing council. It was in Alexandria that the Hebrew Bible was first translated into Greek, a version known as the Septuagint, which would become the standard text for early Christians. The Pharos Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, stood at the entrance to the harbor, a massive structure over 300 feet tall, with a fire burning at its top to guide ships safely to port. It was both functional and symbolic, a beacon of Egypt's power and sophistication. Inside the royal palace complex where Cleopatra lived, there were gardens, temples, theaters, and administrators' buildings. The palace was a city within a city, employing thousands of servants, administrators, and guards. Cleopatra would have presided over elaborate court ceremonies, received foreign ambassadors, and managed the complex bureaucracy that kept Egypt running. Egyptian religion during Cleopatra's reign was a blend of ancient traditions and Hellenistic influences. The old gods, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Ra, were still worshipped, but they had been syncretized with Greek deities. Isis, in particular, had become a universal goddess, worshipped not just in Egypt but throughout the Mediterranean. Cleopatra herself claimed to be the living embodiment of Isis, and she used religious imagery and ritual to legitimize her rule. She participated in ancient ceremonies, made offerings at temples, and commissioned new religious buildings. To the Egyptian people, she was not just a foreign Greek ruler, but a pharaoh in the traditional sense, a divine intermediary between the gods and humanity. Now let's journey even further east, to China, to a discovery that stunned the world and revealed the ambitions of one of history's most enigmatic rulers. In March 1974, a group of farmers in Lintong County, near the city of Xi'an in Shaanxi province, were digging a well. It was a routine task, one they had done many times before, but this time, as their shovels broke through the dry earth, they struck something hard. At first they thought it was pottery, perhaps an old pot or tile, but as they dug further, they uncovered something astonishing. A life-size terracotta head, exquisitely detailed with a stern expression and individualized features. They had stumbled upon one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, the Terracotta Army, a vast underground army created to guard the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. Qin Shi Huang was born Yingzhong in 25 down BCE, the son of the king of the state of Qin, one of several warring states that competed for dominance in ancient China. He ascended to the throne at the age of 13, though real power was held by regents until he came of age. When he did, he proved to be a ruler of extraordinary ambition and ruthlessness. Over the course of his reign, he conquered the other warring states, unifying China under a single centralized government for the first time in its history. In 221 BCE, he declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of Qin, a title that reflected his belief that his dynasty would last for 10,000 generations. Qin Shi Huang was a reformer and a tyrant. He standardized weights, measures, and currency across his empire, facilitating trade and communication. He standardized the written script, ensuring that people from different regions could understand each other. He built roads and canals connecting the far-flung corners of his realm, and he began construction of the Great Wall of China, linking and extending earlier defensive walls to protect against northern invaders. But his methods were brutal. He suppressed dissent ruthlessly, burning books that he deemed subversive and burying scholars alive who opposed his policies. He ruled through fear, with a vast bureaucracy and a network of spies and informers. He was obsessed with immortality, sending expeditions to find the mythical elixir of life, and consuming mercury-laced pills that he believed would grant him eternal youth, pills that likely contributed to his death. Qin Shi Huang died in 210 BCE, while on a tour of his empire. He was 50 years old. His death was kept secret by his chief advisor Li Si, who feared that announcing it would lead to rebellion. The emperor's body was carried back to the capital in a sealed carriage, with a cart of rotting fish placed nearby to mask the smell of decomposition. When the news was finally announced, his son Qin Shi was installed as emperor. But the dynasty did not last. Within a few years, rebellion broke out, and the Qin dynasty fell, replaced by the Han dynasty. But Qin Shi Huang's tomb, located near modern-day Xi'an, remained undisturbed for over 2,000 years, hidden beneath a massive earthen mound that ancient sources described as a mountain. The discovery of the Terracotta Army revealed the scale of Qin Shi Huang's ambitions and his obsession with the afterlife. The army consists of over 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, 520 horses, and 150 cavalry horses, all made of terracotta clay and buried in pits near the emperor's tomb. Each figure is life-sized, and remarkably, each one is unique. The soldiers have different facial features, hairstyles, and expressions, suggesting that they may have been modeled after real members of the emperor's army. They are arranged in military formations, standing in trenches, armed with real weapons, spears, swords, and crossbows, many of which were still sharp when they were excavated. The figures were originally painted in bright colors, reds, blues, greens, and purples, though most of the paint has flaked off over the centuries, leaving the grey terracotta beneath. The purpose of the army was clear. In ancient Chinese belief, the afterlife was a continuation of earthly life, and rulers needed to be equipped for the next world, just as they had been in this one. The Terracotta Army was meant to protect Qin Shi Huang in the afterlife, to serve him as his real army had served him in life. But the army was just one part of a much larger funerary complex. Ancient sources, including the records of the Grand Historian, written by Sima Qian a century after the emperor's death, described the tomb itself as a vast underground palace with rivers of mercury representing the rivers of China, a ceiling decorated with stars and constellations and crossbows rigged to shoot anyone who dared to enter. The sources also claim that the emperor was buried with treasures beyond imagining, and that the workers who built the tomb were sealed inside to prevent them from revealing its secrets. To this day, the central tomb mound has not been excavated. Chinese authorities have been reluctant to open it, partly out of respect for the site, and partly because of concerns about preservation. The terracotta figures, when first exposed to air, began to deteriorate rapidly, and archaeologists fear that opening the tomb itself could destroy whatever is inside. Modern technology, including ground-penetrating radar and remote sensing, has provided some clues. High levels of mercury have been detected in the soil around the tomb, supporting the ancient accounts of mercury rivers. But the full truth of what lies within remains a mystery, one that has captivated archaeologists and historians for decades. The Terracotta Army is a testament to the power and ambition of Qin Shi Huang, a ruler who unified China, built monumental structures, and sought to conquer death itself. But it is also a reminder of the human cost of such ambition. The army was built by hundreds of thousands of workers, many of them conscripts or prisoners, who labored under brutal conditions. The construction of the tomb and the Great Wall and the emperor's other projects required immense resources and caused immense suffering. Qin Shi Huang's quest for immortality was ultimately in vain. He died like any other man, but the legacy he left behind, both the terracotta soldiers and the unified China he created, has endured for millennia. The discovery of the Terracotta Army has had a profound impact on our understanding of ancient China. It has revealed the sophistication of Qin dynasty craftsmanship, the organization of the imperial state, and the beliefs about the afterlife that shaped Chinese culture. The site has become one of the most important archaeological sites in the world, attracting millions of visitors each year and inspiring countless studies and exhibitions. The soldiers stand as silent witnesses to a time of great change and great ambition, a time when one man's vision, for better or worse, shaped the course of a nation. The construction techniques used to create the Terracotta Army were remarkably sophisticated. Each soldier was made using a combination of mold-made and handcrafted elements. The bodies, legs, and arms were made from molds, which allowed for relatively quick production, but the heads were individually sculpted, giving each figure its unique appearance. After the parts were assembled, artisans added details like facial features, hair, armor decorations, and clothing folds. The figures were then fired in kilns at high temperatures to harden the clay. After firing, they were painted with mineral-based pigments. Lacquer was applied in some cases to add shine and durability. The weapons carried by the soldiers were real, made of bronze and other metals, and many showed evidence of advanced metallurgical techniques, including chromium plating that helped prevent rust for over 2 millennia. The organization of the pits reflects military strategy and hierarchy. Pit 1, the largest, contains the main army, over 6,000 soldiers arranged in battle formation. Pit 2 contains a more specialized force, including cavalry, archers, and chariots, representing a mobile strike force. Pit 3 appears to be the command headquarters, with higher-ranking officers and a war chariot. The level of planning and execution required to create this underground army is staggering, involving not just sculptors and potters, but also architects, engineers, metallurgists, and painters. The project would have required careful coordination, quality control, and logistical management on a scale rarely seen in the ancient world. The philosophical and religious beliefs underlying the Terracotta Army are rooted in ancient Chinese cosmology. The Chinese believed in multiple souls or spiritual essences. The Hun, the ethereal soul, ascended to heaven, while the Po, the corporeal soul, remained with the body in the tomb. To ensure the deceased's comfort and status in the afterlife, tombs were filled with replicas or actual items the person would need. Food, clothing, servants, and yes, armies. Earlier Chinese rulers had practiced human sacrifice, burying servants and soldiers with the deceased, but by Qin Shi Huang's time, this had largely been replaced by the use of figurines and models. The Terracotta Army represents the ultimate expression of this tradition, a full-scale replica army designed to serve and protect the emperor in the afterlife. The fall of the Qin dynasty shortly after Qin Shi Huang's death meant that his tomb complex was never fully completed according to the original plans. Ancient sources suggest that the dynasty's collapse led to looting and destruction of parts of the complex. Some of the wooden structures in the pits were burned, possibly by rebel forces led by Xiang Yu, who sought to erase symbols of Qin power. The terracotta warriors were damaged, many broken into pieces when the wooden roofs of the pits collapsed. It's possible that treasures were removed from accessible parts of the complex, though the main burial chamber appears to have remained sealed. The rediscovery in 1974 changed everything. What had been legend and ancient text became tangible reality. The Chinese government recognized the significance immediately and began systematic excavation and preservation efforts. International experts were brought in to help with conservation. The site was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987. Museums were built on-site to display the warriors, and the discovery became a source of national pride for China, a physical link to the country's ancient past and its first unification under a single ruler. But let's move now from the grand ambitions of emperors to the quiet struggles of an artist, a man whose work was dismissed in his lifetime, but who has since become one of the most beloved and influential artists in history. Vincent Willem van Gogh was born on March 30, 1853, in the small village of Groot-Zundert in the southern Netherlands. He was the eldest surviving child of Theodorus van Gogh, a Protestant minister, and Anna Cornelia Carbentus. Vincent's childhood was marked by a sense of isolation and melancholy. He was a sensitive, introspective child, prone to mood swings and bouts of sadness. His relationship with his father was strained, and he struggled to fit in with his peers. He was not a particularly good student, and he left school at the age of 15 to work as an apprentice at an art dealership run by his uncle. Vincent worked for the art dealer Goupil and C, first in The Hague, then in London, and finally in Paris. He was good at his job initially, but his interest in art was more spiritual and commercial. He became increasingly critical of the art market, seeing it as shallow and materialistic. His behavior became erratic, and in 1876 he was dismissed from the firm. Vincent was adrift, unsure of his path. He tried his hand at teaching, working as a teacher and assistant preacher in England. He was deeply religious at this time, influenced by his father's faith and his own intense, almost obsessive spirituality. He wanted to serve God, to help the poor and suffering, and he decided to become a preacher. Vincent enrolled in a missionary school in Brussels, but he struggled with the curriculum and was not accepted for ordination. Undeterred, he went to work as a lay preacher in the Borinage, a coal mining region in Belgium, one of the poorest and most brutal places in Europe. He lived among the miners, sharing their poverty and hardships. He gave away his possessions, slept on the floor, and tended to the sick and injured. But his extreme self-denial and unconventional methods alarmed the church authorities, and he was dismissed from his position. It was a crushing blow, and Vincent fell into a deep depression. He was nearly 30 years old, and he had failed at everything he had tried. But it was in this darkness that he found his calling. In 1880, Vincent decided to become an artist. It was not a sudden decision, but a gradual realization. He had always loved art, had always drawn and sketched, but now he committed himself to it fully. He had no formal training, but he threw himself into learning, studying anatomy, perspective, and technique. He copied works by other artists, practiced drawing from life, and read everything he could about art. His early works were dark and somber, depicting the peasants and workers of the Netherlands and Belgium, rendered in heavy, earthy tones. He was influenced by the French painter Jean-François Millet, whose paintings of rural life and labour resonated with Vincent's own experiences in the Borinage. Vincent's family supported him financially, particularly his younger brother Theo, an art dealer in Paris. Theo believed in Vincent's talent, even when no one else did, and he sent him money every month, allowing Vincent to focus on his art. The relationship between the brothers was deep and complex, and their correspondence, hundreds of letters exchanged over the years, provides an intimate portrait of Vincent's thoughts, struggles, and artistic development. In 1886, Vincent moved to Paris to live with Theo. Paris was the center of the art world, and Vincent was exposed to the latest movements, Impressionism, Pointillism, and the vibrant colors of Japanese prints, which were all the rage among avant-garde artists. His palette lightened, and he began to experiment with brighter colors and looser brushwork. He met other artists, including Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, Paul Gauguin, and Camille Pissarro, and he absorbed their ideas and techniques. But Paris was also overwhelming. The noise, the crowds, the constant stimulation wore on Vincent's fragile mental health. In 1888, seeking peace and inspiration, Vincent moved to Arles, a small town in the south of France. He was captivated by the light and color of Provence. The sunflowers, the wheat fields, the cypresses, and the starry nights. He worked furiously, producing some of his most famous works, including The Bedroom, The Night Café, and multiple versions of Sunflowers. He dreamed of creating an artist's colony in Arles, a place where like-minded painters could live and work together. He rented a small yellow house and invited Paul Gauguin to join him. Gauguin arrived in October 1888, and for a few weeks the two men painted together, sharing ideas and critiques, but their personalities clashed. Gauguin was confident and domineering, while Vincent was intense and emotionally volatile. Arguments broke out, and the tension escalated. In December, after a particularly heated argument, Vincent suffered a mental breakdown. In a fit of confusion and despair, he cut off part of his own ear with a razor. The exact circumstances are debated. Some sources suggest it was a larger portion of the ear, others just the lobe. But the act itself was a clear sign of his deteriorating mental state. Gauguin left immediately, and Vincent was hospitalized. Vincent's mental health continued to decline. He suffered from episodes of psychosis, hallucinations, and deep depression. He was in and out of hospitals, and in May 1889, he voluntarily admitted himself to the St. Paul de Mausolée Asylum in St. Remy de Provence. The asylum was a former monastery, and Vincent was given a small room with a view of the garden and the surrounding countryside. Despite his illness, he continued to paint, creating some of his most powerful and expressive works, including The Starry Night, Irises, and Wheat Field with Cypresses. His brushwork became more agitated, more swirling, reflecting the turbulence of his inner life. The colors were vivid, almost hallucinatory, blues and yellows and greens that seemed to vibrate on the canvas. Vincent's time in the asylum was marked by periods of intense creativity interspersed with debilitating episodes of illness. He wrote to Theo about his struggles, his fears, and his determination to keep working. "I am unable to describe exactly what is the matter with me," he wrote in one letter. "From time to time there are horrible fits of anxiety, apparently without cause." But he also wrote about his hope that his work would endure, that it would speak to people long after he was gone. In May 1890, Vincent left the asylum and moved to Auvers-sur-Oise, a small village near Paris, to be closer to Theo and to be under the care of Dr. Joffre. Paul Gachet, a physician who was sympathetic to artists and who had himself dabbled in painting, Vincent rented a small room above a cafe and threw himself into work, painting the fields, the village church, and portraits of the people around him. He produced an astonishing 70 paintings in the 70 days he spent in Auvers, but his mental state remained fragile. He was anxious about his future, about being a burden on Theo, who was struggling financially and dealing with his own health problems. On July 27, 1890, Vincent went out into the fields with his painting supplies, as he had done many times before. But this time, he took a revolver with him. In the late afternoon, he shot himself in the chest. The wound was not immediately fatal. He managed to stagger back to his room, where he was found by the owner of the cafe. A doctor was called, but there was little that could be done. Theo rushed to his brother's side, and Vincent died in his arms on July 29, 1890. He was 37 years old. Vincent van Gogh's death was a tragedy, but it was not the end of his story. In his lifetime, he sold only a handful of paintings and was largely unknown outside a small circle of artists and supporters. He lived in poverty, dependent on his brother's financial support, and he died believing himself to be a failure. But Theo, devastated by his brother's death, was determined to ensure that Vincent's work was recognized. He began organizing exhibitions and promoting Vincent's paintings. Tragically, Theo himself died just 6 months after Vincent succumbed to the grief and illness that had plagued him. But Theo's widow, Jo van Gogh Bonga, took up the cause. She published Vincent's letters, organized exhibitions, and worked tirelessly to bring his art to the public's attention. Slowly, Vincent's reputation grew. His work resonated with people in a way that was profound and universal. His paintings were raw, emotional, and intensely personal, but they also spoke to something larger, to the beauty and pain of the human experience. His use of color was revolutionary, bold, and expressive, influenced by the Impressionists but pushed further into realms of pure emotion. His brushwork, thick and energetic, gave his paintings a sense of movement and life. He painted the world as he saw it, not with photographic realism, but with feeling, with passion, with a kind of desperate, joyful intensity. Today, Vincent van Gogh is one of the most famous and beloved artists in the world. His paintings, once dismissed and ignored, now sell for tens of millions of dollars. Museums dedicated to his work, such as the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, attract millions of visitors each year. His life has been the subject of countless books, films, and documentaries. He has become a symbol of the tortured artist, the misunderstood genius, the man who suffered for his art. But that narrative, while compelling, can sometimes obscure the real Vincent, a man who was deeply empathetic, who loved nature and literature, who cared about ordinary people, and who believed in the transformative power of art. Vincent's letters to Theo reveal a person who was thoughtful, curious, and generous. He wrote about his struggles, yes, but also about his joys, the beauty of a sunset, the color of a wheat field, the kindness of a stranger. He was not just a man consumed by madness, but a man who fought every day to create something meaningful, to find beauty in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. His paintings are not just records of his illness, they are expressions of his love for life, his fascination with color and light, his desire to connect with others through his art. Vincent van Gogh's legacy is not just in the paintings he left behind, though they are extraordinary, but in the example he set. He showed that art could be a way of understanding the world, of processing pain, of finding meaning in suffering. He showed that it was possible to create something beautiful out of chaos, to transform personal anguish into universal truth. He painted with a fervor and a sincerity that is rare, and his work continues to move people more than a century after his death. In a letter to Theo, Vincent once wrote, "I am always doing what I cannot do yet, in order to learn how to do it." It was that relentless pursuit of growth, that refusal to give up despite failure and suffering, that made him the artist he became. Vincent's relationship with nature was central to his artistic vision. He saw the natural world not as a static backdrop, but as a living, breathing entity filled with energy and emotion. His paintings of wheat fields, olive groves, cypress trees, and starry skies are not literal representations but emotional responses to the landscapes that surrounded him. He wrote to Theo about seeing faces in the twisted branches of olive trees, about feeling the vitality of growing wheat, about the stars as windows into eternity. This animistic view of nature, combined with his bold use of color and dynamic brushwork, created paintings that feel alive, that pulse with an inner light. His technique was unconventional and sometimes criticized by his contemporaries. He applied paint thickly, in a style known as impasto, creating texture and dimension on the canvas. He used complementary colors, reds and greens, blues and oranges, to create visual vibration and intensity. He often painted wet on wet, applying fresh paint over layers that hadn't yet dried, allowing colors to blend and swirl together. He worked quickly, sometimes completing a painting in a single session, driven by an urgency to capture the emotion of the moment before it faded. This spontaneity and expressiveness would later influence entire movements in modern art, from Fauvism to Expressionism to abstract Expressionism. Vincent's depictions of ordinary people, peasants, workers, postmen, cafe owners, showed a deep respect and empathy for working-class life. He painted them with dignity without condescension or sentimentality. His famous series of paintings of peasants eating potatoes, the Potato Eaters, rendered in dark, earthy tones, was meant to show the hard reality of rural life. The hands roughened by labor, the faces lined with hardship. He wanted his paintings to be truthful, to show life as it was lived by most people, not the idealized scenes favored by academic painters or the leisurely pleasures depicted by the Impressionists. The influence of Japanese woodblock prints on Vincent's work cannot be overstated. He collected hundreds of these prints, studied them carefully, and incorporated elements of their style into his own paintings. The Japanese artist's use of flat areas of bold color, their unusual perspectives and cropping, their emphasis on natural subjects, all resonated deeply with Vincent. He painted several direct copies of Japanese prints and created works like The Courtesan after Eisen and Flowering Plum Tree after Hiroshige. But more importantly, he absorbed the Japanese aesthetic sensibility, the idea of finding profound beauty in simple, everyday subjects. A flowering branch, a rainstorm, a bridge over water. This Japanese influence helped Vincent develop his own unique visual language, one that combined Western painting techniques with Eastern compositional principles. Now let's turn our attention to another corner of the ancient world, to the civilization that flourished in Mesoamerica, specifically to the Maya people who built great cities in the jungles of what is now Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. The Maya civilization reached its peak during what archaeologists call the Classic period, roughly 250 to 900 CE, though Maya culture extends back thousands of years before and continues to the present day. The Maya were not a unified empire like Rome or China, but rather a collection of city-states, each ruled by a divine king or Kuhol Ajar, and engaged in complex networks of trade, alliance, and warfare. Maya cities were architectural marvels featuring massive stone pyramids, elaborate palaces, ball courts for playing the ritual Mesoamerican ball game, and precisely aligned astronomical observatories. Cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque Copam, and Chichen Itza contained populations in the tens of thousands, supported by intensive agriculture that included raised fields, terraced hillsides, and sophisticated water management systems. The Maya developed one of the most advanced writing systems in the pre-Columbian Americas, a complex script combining logographic and syllabic elements that could express any spoken phrase. They recorded their history, mythology, astronomical observations, and royal genealogies on stone monuments called stelae, on buildings, in bark paper books called codices, and on pottery. Daily life for an ordinary Maya person was structured around agriculture, particularly the cultivation of maize, beans, and squash. The Mesoamerican trilogy of staple crops. The Maya day began before dawn, with women grinding maize on stone metets to make the corn dough called masa, which was formed into tortillas and cooked on ceramic griddles. Men worked in the fields, using digging sticks and stone axes to clear land and plant crops. The Maya had no metal tools, no wheeled vehicles, and no large domesticated animals for labor. Everything was done through human effort. During the agricultural off-season, men might be called to serve their city's ruler, working on construction projects, serving as warriors, or participating in religious ceremonies. Religion permeated every aspect of Maya life. The Maya believed in a complex cosmos with multiple layers of heavens and underworlds populated by gods, ancestors, and supernatural beings. Time itself was sacred, governed by interlocking calendars that tracked cycles of 260 days. The sacred calendar, and 365 days, the solar calendar, as well as longer cycles stretching thousands of years into the past and future. Religious ceremonies involved offerings of incense food and precious items like jade and shell, as well as bloodletting rituals where rulers and nobles pierced their tongues, ears, or genitals with stingray spines or obsidian blades, offering their blood to nourish the gods and maintain cosmic balance. The Maya were keen observers of the heavens, tracking the movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars with remarkable precision. Venus was particularly important, associated with warfare and considered an omen for military campaigns. The Maya could predict solar and lunar eclipses, calculated the length of the solar year to an accuracy comparable to modern measurements, and created astronomical tables that allowed them to predict celestial events far into the future. This astronomical knowledge was not purely scientific, but deeply integrated with religion and political power. The ability to predict eclipses and other celestial phenomena gave rulers important ideological authority. Maya art and iconography are rich with symbolism. The maize god, depicted as a beautiful young man with an elongated head shaped like an ear of corn, represented agricultural abundance and the cycle of death and rebirth. The rain god Chak, wielding a lightning axe, brought the storms necessary for crops. The sun god Kinich Ajal journeyed through the underworld each night, battling the forces of death before emerging triumphant at dawn. Rulers were depicted as embodiments of these gods, wearing elaborate costumes and headdresses that identified them with divine powers. They were shown in the act of bloodletting, dancing in ritual costume, capturing enemies in battle, and presiding over sacrificial ceremonies. Human sacrifice was practiced by the Maya, though perhaps not on the scale seen among the later Aztecs. Captives taken in warfare, particularly high-ranking nobles or enemy rulers, were the most prestigious sacrificial victims. They might be kept for months or years before being sacrificed in elaborate public ceremonies timed to important calendar dates. The method of sacrifice varied: decapitation, heart extraction, or ritual binding and drowning. The ballgame, played on eye-shaped courts found in most Maya cities, also had sacrificial associations. The game involved keeping a heavy rubber ball in play using only the hips, thighs, and upper arms, trying to send it through stone rings set high on the court walls. While the exact rules varied, and most games were probably not fatal, ceremonial matches might end with the sacrifice of captives, or possibly even members of the losing team. The collapse of classic Maya civilization around 900 CE remains one of archaeology's great mysteries. Within the span of a century or two, the great southern lowland cities were largely abandoned, their monuments unfinished, their palaces empty. The population declined dramatically, and power shifted to cities in the northern Yucatan and the highlands of Guatemala. Theories for this collapse include environmental degradation from over-intensive agriculture, prolonged drought recorded in climate data from lake sediments and stalagmites, epidemic disease, internal warfare and political fragmentation, and disruption of trade networks. Most likely, it was a combination of these factors, a perfect storm of environmental stress, political instability, and social upheaval that the rigid hierarchical structure of Maya society couldn't withstand. But the Maya didn't disappear. Millions of Maya people live today in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, maintaining their languages, traditions, and cultural identities despite centuries of colonization, oppression, and marginalization. Many still speak Mayan languages, practice traditional agriculture, and maintain ritual practices that connect them to their ancient past. The decipherment of Maya writing, a process that accelerated dramatically in the latter half of the 20th century, has given voice to the ancient Maya, allowing us to read their own accounts of their history, beliefs, and achievements. As we reach the end of this journey through history, from the streets of ancient Rome to the palaces of Egypt, from the tomb of a Chinese emperor to the fields of southern France, from the jungles of Mesoamerica to civilizations across the globe, we're reminded that history is not just about dates and events. It is about people, their struggles, their triumphs, their failures, and their legacies. It is about the choices they made, the risks they took, and the ways they tried to make sense of the world around them. The people we have encountered tonight, the anonymous Romans trying to survive in a brutal city, Cleopatra fighting to preserve her kingdom and her legacy, Qin Shi Huang seeking immortality through monumental architecture, Vincent van Gogh transforming his pain into art, and the Maya people building a sophisticated civilization in the jungle, were all in their own ways trying to leave a mark on the world, to matter, to be remembered. And they have been remembered, not because they were perfect, but because they were human. They made mistakes, they suffered, they loved, they created, and they endured. Their stories resonate with us, because they reflect our own struggles, our own desires, our own fears. We look back at them, not with pity, but with recognition. We see ourselves in their choices, their passions, their determination to keep going, even when the odds were against them. History is a mirror, and in it, we see not just the past, but ourselves. So, what can we learn from these stories? Perhaps that life, in any era, is difficult, that power is fleeting, that fame is uncertain, that suffering is universal, but also that beauty can be found even in the darkest places, that creativity can flourish in the midst of pain, that love and ambition and hope can drive people to do extraordinary things. The Romans built an empire that shaped the world. Cleopatra defended her kingdom with intelligence and courage. Qin Shi Huang unified a nation and created wonders that endure to this day. Vincent van Gogh painted with a passion that continues to move people more than a century later. The Maya created a civilization of remarkable sophistication, with advanced mathematics, astronomy, art, and architecture. They were not superhuman. They were people like us, trying to navigate a complex and often cruel world. And in their stories, we find inspiration not because they never failed, but because they kept trying. They remind us that history is not something distant and abstract, but something alive, something that connects us to the past and shapes our future. We are all part of that ongoing story, adding our own chapters, making our own choices, leaving our own marks. However small or large they may be, every one of us is living in what will someday be history, and the choices we make today will echo into the future, just as the choices of the ancient Romans, the Egyptians, the Chinese, the Maya, echo to us across the centuries. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this exploration, please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what other historical topics you would like to explore, what stories you want to hear, what mysteries you want to uncover. History is vast and endlessly fascinating, and there are so many more stories to tell. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and remember that the past is never really gone. It lives on in the stories we tell, the lessons we learn, and the connections we make across time. We are all, in the end, part of the same human story, connected across millennia by our shared hopes, fears, dreams, and struggles. And that connection, that continuity, is what makes history not just worth studying, but essential to understanding who we are and who we might become.